Today, we're talking about debt, something so baked into our lives that you're probably swiping your card to buy it every single day. Debt is a bizarre commodity. It doesn't require a factory, raw materials, or a blue-collar workforce, yet it's insanely profitable. In fact, debt is the most lucrative product in human history. It funds wars, it topples empires, turns entire nations into debt slaves, and quietly drains wealth from everyday folks through hidden fees. In this video, we're going to answer the real questions. Where did debt start? Who invented this game? And why does the entire global financial system revolve around it?
First off, what even is debt? At its core, debt is just a promise. I borrow $500 from you today, and I promise to give it back tomorrow. But there's a killer variable injected into this promise: interest. In that setup, I'm borrowing at 0% interest. But let's say I act like a loan shark and charge you 5% a day. That $500 today becomes $525 tomorrow, and $551 the day after. In just 48 hours, that's over a 10% jump. And remember, this is compound interest, the exact thing Albert Einstein allegedly called the eighth wonder of the world. And humanity has been wrestling with this concept for thousands of years.
Let's rewind to ancient times. The Mesopotamians were among the first civilizations to log debts, carving them onto clay tablets. But they were smart about it. Every few decades, they'd throw a massive nationwide debt jubilee, wiping the slate completely clean. Why? Because they knew that if the common folks got buried in debt, the entire social fabric would collapse. Even the Hebrew Bible mandated a similar rule, the Jubilee year, where all debts were canceled every 50 years. They knew unmanaged debt is nothing short of financial shackles. It can turn an entire society into slaves. But as time rolled on, kings and rulers learned a different lesson. Don't cancel debt, weaponize it. From that point on, debt stopped being a problem to solve. It became a tool of governance, the most terrifying weapon of mass control to ever exist.
During the Middle Ages in Europe, the Catholic Church strictly banned usury. Basically, making money off someone else's sweat and struggle was viewed as a mortal sin. But entrepreneurs always find a loophole. They didn't call it a loan, they called it a commercial contract. They didn't call it interest, they called it shipping fees, risk premiums, or processing costs. You name it. The goal? Pocket the profit while keeping their hands clean in the eyes of God. By the Renaissance, banking dynasties in Florence, like the Medici family, rose up as the ultimate sugar daddies of Europe. They didn't need vast lands or massive armies. Just by lending cash to kings and popes, they built a financial empire. And let's be real, when you hold the king's purse strings, you basically run the king. This is where debt officially evolved from a simple financial tool into the raw engine of power. Because whoever controls the debt controls the borrower.
Moving into the 17th century, the borrowing game reached a whole new level because this time, governments entered the chat. The Dutch were fighting a war of independence against Spain, and they came up with a genius move: selling bonds to the public. If you bought a bond, you were basically lending money to the state. In return, you got regular interest payments. Plus, you could trade these bonds like regular commodities. And just like that, boom, war was no longer limited by the gold sitting in the king's vault. The state could now borrow endlessly by financializing the future. The British saw this and instantly copied the homework. In 1694, they founded the Bank of England. This was a historic paradigm shift. National debt became an official institution. The government stopped begging individual wealthy donors and started borrowing directly from the central bank.
The bank, in turn, printed money backed by that very debt. The state began living on borrowed time and money, borrowing paying interest, refinancing, and borrowing again in an endless loop. Meanwhile, bankers went from mere lenders to the puppet masters holding the fate of the entire kingdom. And the interest? It was a gold mine. Lending to a government is the safest bet on earth, because if they run out of cash to pay you back, they can just squeeze the citizens with higher taxes. With that safety net, rulers could wage wars with zero financial hesitation. Back then, when you ran out of cash, the war was over. Now, you just borrow more and keep shooting. War expands the empire, captures colonies, and opens new markets. And the more you expand, the more excuses you have to borrow. A perfect vicious cycle was born. More wars meant more debt. More debt made the bankers richer. Richer bankers meant more capital to lend, which fueled even more wars.
By the 18th and 19th centuries, bond markets in London, Paris, and Amsterdam became the beating heart of global finance. Armies marching, battleships sailing, empires expanding, all of it ran on leverage. The modern world was literally built on debt, and the people who mastered the art of selling debt were the ones actually rewriting history. From there, the world started breeding a planet of debt addicts. Gradually, this stopped being just a game for kings and governments. As industrial capitalism exploded, everyday citizens were dragged right into the debt vortex. Railroads? Built on debt. Factories? Debt. Infrastructure? Debt. Workers were clocking in at companies that were drowning in bank loans, only to take their paychecks and hand them over to pay off their own debts. Home loans, equipment loans, and eventually, loans for everything else. Debt literally infiltrated every single synapse of the economic body. By the 20th century, debt graduated from elite financial boardrooms to the mass market. People borrowed for mortgages, auto loans, and student debt. The entire modern economy was engineered to make living debt-free look abnormal.
And here's the lethal catch. Debt isn't a one-time transaction, like selling a slice of pizza. It's a perpetual cash vacuum. Every interest payment is a wealth transfer from the poor to the rich, from the masses to the elite, repeating month after month, year after year, forever. For example, if you sign a 30-year mortgage on a house, you end up paying double or triple its actual value. If you carry a balance on a credit card and miss a deadline, that debt compounds faster than your hair grows. What started as a simple promise to pay is now a financial quicksand that almost nobody escapes. Debt isn't just a transaction. It is the most successful business model in human history. No factories, no raw materials, no inventory overhead. Just time, patience, and waiting for your check to clear. The early players who mastered this, the Amsterdam merchants, the London bankers, the Wall Street titans, became the architects of modern global finance. A system built not just to manage debt, but to manufacture debt, feed it, and survive on it.
By the mid-20th century, debt stopped being a temporary fix and became the oxygen of global finance. In 1944, the world gathered for the Bretton Woods Conference. It was marketed as building a brand new economic order, but in reality, it institutionalized debt as the ultimate geopolitical remote control. This birthed two massive institutions, the IMF and the World Bank. The PR spin said they were here to help poor, developing nations borrow capital. The reality? They set up the global game of debt and discipline, otherwise known as the carrot and the stick. Nations get the carrot, the loan, but they must obey the master. If they flinch, they get the stick. The IMF, puppet mastered by the US and Europe, would say, "Sure, we'll bail you out, but you must slash public spending, privatize your assets, and deregulate your markets. Don't want to? Cool, no cash for you." The result? Entire sovereign nations lost their self-determination,
Their economic blueprints weren't drafted by their own leaders, but by suits sitting in Washington, D.C. or Brussels.
Meanwhile, down on the ground, a silent revolution was hitting everyday citizens. Post-World War II, banks realized a brand new goldmine. Don't just lend to governments, sell debt directly to suburban households. And just like that, the middle-class American dream was manufactured. You need a house, a car, a TV, and a washing machine. Everything had to look premium. But the catch? It could all be financed. The 30-year mortgage became the ultimate badge of success. Instead of earn it to buy it, the philosophy flipped to finance it to flash it. Then came furniture financing, auto loans, and credit cards. Debt was officially rebranded as just another everyday consumer product. This was a massive historical paradigm shift. Debt used to carry a heavy social stigma, but now it's completely normalized, heavily encouraged, and has even become a status symbol for young people trying to flex on social media. Remember that whole trend of people flexing their black cards? Let's look under the hood. What is that card, really? If you're just an average 9-to-5 worker building up credit to get a mortgage, you're already in the zone to get targeted for these cards. Once you grow up, settle down, and get a mortgage, it's just standard procedure. So I don't really get the flex. I guess it's just bragging about the buy now, pay later lifestyle. Live for today, let future me worry about the bill. It sounds like a deep lifestyle philosophy, but honestly, it's just financial irresponsibility wrapped in marketing. For the banks, this is an infinite money glitch. Millions of households paying monthly interest creates a permanent compounding cash flow that never stops.
For the government, debt creates the perfect illusion of infinite economic growth, even if wages are totally stagnant. Just swipe the Amex, finance the house, lease the car. But make no mistake, everyone is just spending tomorrow's money today. For corporations, debt is a dream come true. Customers can buy the whole world without a dime in their pockets, just off a signature and a promise to settle up later. Debt became the ghost in the machine of modern capitalism. No mines, no factories needed, just signatures, contracts, and the power to manifest money out of a promise. Sounds like Matrix-level illusions, right? But it's the most real thing keeping the economy alive today.
So what's the dark side of all this? The entire system is hopelessly addicted to growth. Banks don't actually want you to pay off your debt. They want you to service it forever. You refinance, you roll it over, you borrow more. The longer you owe, the more they make. For governments, borrowing money is way easier than raising taxes. In the West, politicians promise the world today and push the invoice onto the next generation. And the Federal Reserve just stands in the back, printing cash to keep the gears of the debt machine well-oiled. Debt is no longer a temporary bridge between struggle and hope. It's the permanent spine of global finance. Looking back at the 1970s and 80s, the withdrawal symptoms of this debt addiction started to show. Developing nations across Latin America, Africa, and Asia were borrowing like crazy during their growth booms, seduced by Western banks whispering, "Just take the cash. You've got oil in the ground. Grow faster." But then interest rates skyrocketed when then Fed Chairman Paul Volcker aggressively tightened monetary policy. Suddenly, poor countries couldn't clear their tabs. In 1982, Mexico declared default, and the dominoes started falling. That's when the Western powers stepped in with ultimate generosity, saying, "All right, fine, we'll lend you more money." But the strings attached were brutal, enforced by the IMF and the World Bank. Mexico walked straight into the debt trap. To survive, you borrow. To pay it back, you borrow again. With every cycle, their sovereignty shrank. Everyday citizens faced brutal austerity, soaring prices, and mass unemployment.
while the elites and lenders collected interest like clockwork. While poor nations drowned in debt, the Western financial sector did something wild. They turned debt into a tradable commodity. Mortgages, auto loans, and corporate debt were pooled together, sliced up, packaged, and sold to global investors. This meant debt was no longer a simple agreement between you and your bank. It became a financial instrument to be traded, flipped, and shorted. Wall Street stopped focusing on making real things and shifted entirely to engineering complex layers of debt to extract profit. They called this financialization. Sounds sophisticated, right? But basically, it's just using debt as the raw material for the entire economy. Banks issue loans, instantly flip them to investors, collect a fee at every step, and dump the risk onto someone else.
To the public, they pitched it as risk diversification. In reality, they were just hiding the rot until it blew up. And blow up it did. In 2008, the debt bomb detonated. Trillions of dollars in mortgage-backed securities vaporized because everyday Americans couldn't keep up with the predatory loans. The experts had inflated the value of debt far beyond reality. When the bubble popped, the entire global financial architecture shook to its core. And what happened next? The US government didn't lock up the villains who engineered the crash. They bailed them out. The ultimate fallout? Everyday people lost their homes, their jobs, and their life savings, while the big banks got fully capitalized lifelines. Post-crash, debt didn't shrink. It exploded. The Federal Reserve slashed interest rates to near zero and pumped infinite liquidity to stimulate the economy. But all this really did was feed the debt monster even more. By this point, debt transcended profit. It became the fundamental glue holding the entire system together. The government survives on it, corporations use it to fund stock buybacks, and citizens borrow it just to stay middle class. If you unplug debt right now, the whole American system collapses instantly. Following 2008, central banks kept rates at rock bottom and flooded the economy with liquidity, promising this emergency medicine would bring stability. Instead, they just supercharged the addiction. Cheap money incentivized governments, corporations, and households to borrow like there's no tomorrow. Today, global debt sits at a staggering $300 trillion, more than 3 times the entire world's annual economic output. In the history of human civilization, we have never owed this much. And the irony? This mountain of debt is celebrated as economic growth. Politicians boast about GDP going up, conveniently ignoring the fact that this growth is entirely fueled by hijacking tomorrow's money. It's also wild how lucrative debt has become. Banks aren't just making money on interest, they've created an entire industrial complex around servicing debt, refinancing, collection, and restructuring. Investors clear billions trading sovereign bonds, betting on the survival of entire nations. Hedge funds speculate on distressed assets, profiting off the misery of bankrupt countries or failing companies. And credit rating agencies, the supposedly neutral referees, act as gatekeepers, deciding who gets cheap money and who gets crushed by premium rates. The genius and evil of this system is how it concentrates wealth. Every interest payment is a wealth pipeline from debtor to lender. Over time, it systematically drains capital from millions of households swiping credit cards or paying mortgages, and dumps it directly into the balance sheets of Wall Street megabanks and hedge funds. Debt doesn't just generate profit, it engineers society. The wealthy borrow cheap to leverage and multiply their assets. The poor borrow expensive just to survive, trapping themselves in an infinite loop of debt servicing.
And right now, central banks are testing the next evolution of this game:
central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. This is programmable money. It can be tracked, coded, and controlled. Loans will be instantly approved or denied by algorithms, and interest rates can be manipulated in real time. And that's the real scoop on debt. I'm Pip.